a message that is delivered even with the best of intentions but doesn't land right won't be heard properly. And so I won't just give tough news for the sake of giving it. I also like to communicate it in a way that it will be heard for the benefit of the organization.
Imagine how great the workplace would be, your workplace, if you had a better boss. Or maybe you have a great boss. Or maybe he's been following my guest, and I'm going to reveal her name soon. But if you had a better workplace, you could drive more revenue as a company. You'd have greater customer satisfaction because you'd have engaged and happy employees. Man, would we need that? We do need that. And today's guest has an answer for that because she has something called the Better Boss Blueprint. She's on the Unstoppables. You know the place. We turn those intentions, the ideas, into real dollars and maybe just have some fun along the way. And I know we're going to do it today because welcome to the show, my friend, Shani Magosky.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
We had some fun in the preamble. We always have fun. And some of the best stuff, Shani, comes from that seminal thought that's not on the air. So
absolutely.
I'll try to shake it up a little bit, make it come back. But you want to show the people we have a connection here, and it's a long football one. But show your pride. Go ahead and tell people about that.
Well, okay. So I've got what I already showed you, which is the University of Miami Hurricanes. This is what adorns the wall in my apartment. And I'm going to surprise you on air and show you this as well. This is me in 1987. Gosh,
wow.
Ages me.
That is, wow. Okay.
1987 in the Orange Bowl, back in the day.
Who'd you play in that Orange Bowl?
We played a lot of people, including Notre Dame. I do not think we played Penn State that particular year, but we played Florida.
Right. I think Oklahoma in one of them too.
Absolutely. That year we beat Oklahoma in the national championship.
And you were there, hoisted right up on shoulders and arms and everything else.
Exactly. In this particular stunt, my ass is sitting on some lucky guy's hand. Yeah.
That's the way I would frame it. Speaking of frame, do you autograph those and send them out?
Well, I get more requests to autograph and sign this these days.
There we go.
I'm happy to autograph the cheerleading picture as well.
There we go. Well, I went to Penn State for my master's, and that's where we get the football thing because we did play for the national championship. We won't talk about who won, but it was me. So talk to me, to take me from 30,000 feet. Did I say that? We can take that off. Take this from 30,000 feet, and you're hoisted up, and some guy's hand is lucky because it's on your ass, all the way from there to here, give it to me.
Okay. Graduated from the University of Miami with a degree in marketing and communication, and then proceeded to spend the first mostly half of my career working on Wall Street. I like to refer to myself as a recovering investment banker. I worked at Goldman Sachs in 3 different divisions in New York and then in Chicago. In 2004, I got super burnt out and disillusioned, and I decided that was no longer what I wanted to be when I grew up. Moved to Vail, Colorado for not just a change of scenery, but a change of career. And at that point, I did a huge shift, reinvented myself as the manager of one of the local television stations. I did that for a couple years, and then for 5 years, I was chief operating officer of a marketing company. And then at that point, I went into business for myself, doing leadership development, consulting, and executive coaching. And that has morphed into the Better Boss Project, as well as What's Next, which I can tell you about later.
What's the driving impetus behind the Better Boss Project? And I'm going to frame it in 2 ways. Is it the opportunity because you see such a lack of leadership in the workplace? Or is this something inside of you that you were in some way treated in a way that said, you know what, I'll take this and I'm going to make this out here. I'm going to take this thing and just make it something better for other people who won't suffer through what I suffer through.
Yeah, it's both. I would say formed on a variety of experiences that I had that I'll come back to in just a second, And in my work across all sorts of organizations over the past way too many years to count, there's a dysfunction in management and leadership that is pervasive and spans every industry, every geography, every functional area. But to personalize it, which I think is the more interesting piece of the answer, when I was at Goldman, in my second job, which was I was an associate on the junk bond desk in fixed income. At that point in time, I was engaged to be married to a fabulous guy. He was a doctor at Mount Sinai Hospital. He was 27, I was 26. Out of the blue, he was diagnosed with stage 4 metastatic colon cancer and died 7 months later in our apartment. And my bosses at Goldman, both my immediate direct boss and her boss, who went on to become the co-president of Goldman at one point, were so amazing that I can't even describe it. They were supportive. They let me come and go as I needed to. They, speaking of football, they played the long game with me, investing in me as a great performer and as a human being. And they knew that if I had any regrets about the way I spent my time during those months that he was sick and I was caring for him, that I would be bitter in the end and that no one would win in the long run. And so their support showed me from a very early stage of my career what empathy looks like and what a really great leader looks like. And frankly, some other leaders I had at Goldman were also really amazing culture setters and that. And then later in my career, I had some of the worst fucking bosses you can imagine. And which all those experiences are great. And you learn from them. And what it's showed me was how wide the pendulum can swing. But it was really wanting to perpetuate the kind of treatment that I had in such a good way in those early years at Goldman that ultimately propelled me to the Better Boss Project.
You know, I would think that it's the good boss is the boss that's more vulnerable, more human, is okay to be known as the emperor sometimes, you know, who has clothes because he is vulnerable and he is showing himself.
Yeah.
I would think that. And I would think dysfunctional. I want to ask you about dysfunctional. I know there are myriad exponential reasons why something could be, an organization could be dysfunctional, just by nature of humans in it and the nature of, you know, and human nature.
Yeah.
What do you think is the major source of dysfunction in a boss?
Poor communication. And that's very broad. And an analogy I've been using lately, which seems to resonate, and so I'm going to say it again, is that poor communication is like the plaque clogging the arteries of an organization. And most of us are very familiar with what that does to our cholesterol, to our heart health, to our well-being. And that's what happens when people in organizations aren't communicating well in every direction about good things and difficult things.
Stay with the medical metaphors for a minute. If that is what is clogging our arteries in companies, what is fear doing? Where does that fit into the malaise of the body?
Oh, gosh. You know, I hadn't thought about that, but what comes to mind is sugar. Like processed sugar that we add to our bodies is so poisonous and toxic, right? And we have a choice whether to eat that donut or not. And so it's like fear is something we're choosing in most circumstances, as opposed to having a mind shift that allows us to interpret something that might feel scary instead as an opportunity.
I'm going to tell you, it's a great analogy. Because
Thank you.
it's a great analogy right there. Because I see a lot in companies I work with, I see a lot of this. I see positional fear that's dispensed by the person who believes they are that title, the position, and believes they're more worthy of the air that they suck off this planet than their coworkers, which they call employees. You know, indentured servitude is what they believe. So they're dispensing fear throughout the company, and you limit the growth. You lose your good people. You know, they go out the door, either physically, which is eventually, but you definitely lose their hearts and minds. So I think fear is one of those insidious things that filter through turf wars, position, not showing they don't know, and those leaders hide behind it. The worst bosses in the world are the ones that think they know it all, and they try to close their blinds and shut themselves off with really, really, really abhorrent communication skills.
Yep. And those are the people who react to fear and threats in a protecting way, because they say, oh, I can't let anybody see that I'm rattled, so I'm either going to put such a cool distance between me and others, and that often shows up as arrogance. And what we really know is beneath that is ego. They're scared to have their ego exposed.
Very well said, because I believe, and I've actually made T-shirts with this, I think somewhere we're going to make them anyway. I do make coffee cups with this, that ego with talent is perceived as confidence. So that's why I think that, ego and talent is confidence. But when you have an ego and you don't have talent, that's just arrogance. And that's found out pretty quickly. I want to take you to the environment. My goal in the environment that I create is to make it one that is free of fear, is to make it a fertile, a fecund environment for those who can and will and are able to further their own life. It's about lifestyle options. It's about their agenda and motive. And I want to make it an environment they can learn from and grow from. And it's a work in process. So you talk about the better boss can change an environment, and make in a better environment changes everything. So would you expand upon that?
Yeah, I guess I'm like the analogy queen today, because what came into my head as you were formulating that question was, it's like trying to plant a fancy garden with expensive flowers. You go buy the most expensive seeds, and then you forget to fertilize it. They're not going to grow, or they're not going to grow to their full potential, because you haven't set you haven't instilled the kind of environment in which they will thrive, which is what, again, happens pervasively in organizations. Their managers are short-sighted. They're in it for themselves. They've got those egos that get in the way, and they don't know how to communicate properly, or they're not taking time to do it. Their priorities are fucked up.
Who hires you? What type of company?
You name it. I work with anything from Fortune 500 companies to startups, universities, healthcare systems. When people ask me what the common denominator is among my clients, because they'll say, who's your ideal client? As if I'm going to tell them some industry in some city. And my simple answer is clients who are willing to do the work, right? Mm-hmm. Clients who don't want to just do what I say and not what I do. From the senior management level down, there's got to be an alignment between what, sort of the rhetoric and the actual behavior that they're exhibiting. And whether that's for individual coaching engagement, I want an executive who's open-minded and willing to hear what their blind spots are and do something about it. And on a team level or in an organizational capacity, same thing. I want leaders that are committed to real change and not just lip service and checking a bunch of boxes.
That's like the armchair quarterback. It looks easier watch it on television than it is an actual implementation. What you just said is willing to do the work, and that is one of the most high bars there are to anything there is in life. People aren't really willing to take responsibility, accountability, and really do the work. Shani, I think it comes down to this. I think it comes down to people, product, and process. But at the end of the day, everything revolves around, through, and with people, for people. It's all about people. So how do you broach the tough one? You diagnosed what it is. It's this boss down in the corner. He's been around a long time. He's got, because you know this guy, right? And how do you take that to management? And this may be one of those sacred cows. And you say, here's your problem. Right here. You've got a direct approach. I got to think it's direct, but you see that often? And when you do, how do you go after it?
Yeah, absolutely. So you have to be direct, and you also have to tread lightly, because a message that is delivered even with the best of intentions but doesn't land right won't be heard properly. And so I won't just give tough news for the sake of giving it. I also like to communicate it in a way that it will be heard for the benefit of the organization. And a tool that I use a lot for that purpose is the Leadership Circle Profile and the Leadership Circle Culture Survey. One is for individual leaders, and the other one is for culture. It's an instrument that is grounded in all the best research from not just leadership effectiveness, but personal development, human development, organizational psychology, you name it. And for individuals, it runs through all of the ways they are or are not showing up across the 18 dimensions of creative leadership competency, and then how they're showing up in their reactive mode, and how that differs from how they're perceived. So the leader will do their own self-assessment, and then we do kind of a 360 round where their direct reports, their peers, their boss's boss, and anyone else who's in a position to legitimately comment on their leadership answers the question. And one of the very first things that you see in the report is where your perception of yourself differs from how others are saying you show up. So it's not calling anybody out on the table in particular. It's giving aggregate feedback. It feels a little less like stinging. And the way we position it is in a way that's like, listen, and you've gotten as far as you've gotten doing it this way. Look at all the opportunity you have to do more if you could expand on what you're doing well and just minimize some of the areas that are working against you right now. And
go ahead.
Similarly, with the culture survey, instead of asking people to assess an individual leader, the questions are geared more toward the culture of the team or the organization. So it's a commentary of more of the gestalt of the culture versus one individual's leadership style, but with very similar framework and output.
Would you define culture for me?
Culture is basically what leaders tolerate of themselves and others.
Okay, this is strange. You've been listening in, or we have some kind of relationship that extends previous to today. But what I learned, what I learned in a Vistage group, it was a tech group, became Vistage. What I learned is that as a leader, you're known much more for what you tolerate than what you ever accomplish, because the people are watching, and that's how they assess who and what you are. Yeah. How much of your test, the profiles you do, how much is the questionnaire really a subjective form, which is what do your peers think of you, how do they feel, versus the objective measurement form, or is it straight subjective?
It's a little bit of both. The bulk of the questionnaire, there's a little over 100 questions. There's statements that you either agree or disagree with in a score of 1 to 5. Mm-hmm. And the results, you can find them in the raw scores, but the results are presented in percentile format, where your results are compared against the hundreds of other thousands of leaders who have taken the leadership circle profile. So it kind of where do you compare versus all the other leaders out there. And that's very objective. And then there's also some questions that are subjective and can be customized. The questions that I typically like to use are pretty straightforward. What should this leader continue doing? What should this leader start doing? What should this leader stop doing? And we normally get some really valuable, juicy feedback in there. And to the person that I've done this with and the organization that I've done the culture survey with, they say it's the richest feedback they've ever gotten, and that they've never seen anything like it. Because this thing goes, it's not just about competencies, right? Every organization has a list of competencies that leaders need to say they meet in order to get evaluated well. Well, we don't change our competencies unless we're changing the behaviors that lead to showing up good or bad on that competency.
Right.
And as adults, we don't change our behavior, generally speaking, unless we change the underlying belief structure that we've been building for X number of decades that leads us to behave in a certain way. And this instrument gets underneath all of those things, and it generates real, like, smart and honest dialogue, and also constructive. Like, people don't take it personally. It's amazing, because I've debriefed other sorts of assessments as well, and people get all defensive and they read into it, and there's something about the humanity of this particular tool, and then the way I use it to integrate it into, okay, how is this showing up in your strategies? How is it showing up in your tactics? How is it showing up in your conversations? That really moves people and teams forward.
There has to be a plethora of people trying to do what you do. There's got to be a lot of noise in your space. How do you separate yourself in that space?
It's a good question. I mean, the most frank answer I can give you is that I'm not a boring old white guy.
Well, that's good. We'll take a commercial break there. But no, I love it. Keep going. And
and I have the real experience underlying the coaching and the consulting. There's a lot of folks out there who, hang up a shingle as a coach or a consultant, and maybe they worked a real job once upon a time, maybe they didn't. But like, I have sat in the chair on the hot seat that my clients have sat in. I've managed teams. I've been in sales with stretch goals. I've had awful people on my teams that I've had to develop. I've had the egomaniacs. I've had to manage highly distributed teams. I've managed managers of managers. I've changed strategies. I've switched technology. Like, I've been there, done that, and faced all the challenges that my clients have. So I think I show up with some, like, the street cred, if you will, that shows that I know where they're coming from, and I can help them fix what they're going through, or at least make some progress on it.
And that's where I was moving. I was moving on the credibility part, because that's one of the strongest forms, is credibility, of really gaining the acclaim, the attention, and the distance. For you, it's not only inferred because of what you've done, Wall Street, what you did on Wall Street, how valued you were in what you did, but other people who've worked with you who would refer you in because of what they experienced. Those are the three forms: inferred, referred, experienced. And I would say to you that you have separated yourself, because you're preaching to me, and I hear every bit of what you're saying. You're 99% different because you actually did the freaking work.
Yeah.
You're not a consultant. You're a participant in the game. You played the game at the highest level. You're not an observer on the sideline. And how many people get on, do courses, say this, say what I think, I read this, I have a degree. They never freaking met a client. Their balls would shrink the first time they ever sat across a conference table from a real client, because they think that perfect strategy would remain intact. It don't.
That's right, because
I'm getting passionate.
Nothing is perfect in an imperfect world.
No, it's not. There's just better than and good. And I heard this a long time ago. I heard it again today. That the enemy of perfect, good. The enemy of good is perfect, and all we can ever try for is good.
Yeah, and for most people, the enemy of done is perfect. A lot of people just don't follow through because they think it needs to be perfect.
Oh, that's the next thing, is follow through. Follow up is something that is another bane of my existence in corporate America. So what would the first step be? I see the assessment. I know that I have to change something in my underlying behavior. That may be the answer. But what's the first step to becoming a better boss?
Setting some realistic goals and then working towards them every single day. Small steps, right? We eat the elephant one bite at a time.
Ethiopian proverb.
Yeah, we take the results, and sure, it's like reading through a fire hose. There's 17 directions you could go in to get better, but that waters it down. So I have people pick just a couple of things that they really want to improve on, where they think they'll get a really good bang for their buck, partially because it fits what they're trying to accomplish on their team or their client base. I mean, there's a lot of different reasons to go in one direction or another, and then have them set small little daily achievable goals, right? Like, no new habit forms unless we're practicing it daily. Just like you don't build new muscles. We were also talking about The Rock before our Facebook Live show started today, right? You do not look like The Rock unless you're in the gym every day. Right.
Or on a movie set, but
that's right.
First. That's how you get on the movie set. And of course, you had to go to Miami, like The Rock did, to really get in, be number one. I think he's number one, right? The highest paid actor.
Yep, in the world, I believe.
It's an amazing story. Let me ask you, in your experience, what's your biggest success, let's call it that, in turning an organization, or at least having influence into the impact of that culture by doing something with leadership? Give me a story.
Yep. One that comes to mind, because it's recent and still ongoing, is working with a big technology company in their global sales force and their sales management, really helping them speak a more business acumen oriented language, so that they're shifting from more of a transactional sale to a long-term partnership sale, where what they're talking to customers about is how they help them drive revenue or save money over the long run versus, just like this one little product or service. And then having a management team that is supportive of that and coaching it properly. And this management team has also done these leadership profiles that I mentioned earlier. And like the qualitative feedback we're getting so far is just phenomenal. Like, best thing I've ever done, most impactful training I've ever gone through. It's changed the quality of my conversations, et cetera, et cetera. And that's why I do this. Like, talk about having like really done it. Like now that's where I get my joy, is actually seeing other people get impacted by it.
It gives you a bounce. That's, I don't want to speak for you, but that's probably your why.
100%. Yeah. Because my tagline for the Better Boss Project is live and lead with no regrets, right? And I feel like that's what people have their mind filled with is, oh, I should have done this, I could have done that, beating themselves up. And it's not just about the things they didn't do in their personal life. Oh, I didn't have another kid, or oh, I didn't go to Greece, or whatever people are always shooting on themselves about. Like, this stuff happens at work all the time. Like, oh, I should have gone for that promotion, I should have had that difficult conversation. And a lot of the self-awareness and the communication skills that I teach teams and leaders to really embrace help them not have those kind of regrets, so that they can sleep better at night and look back on their life and say, you know what, I did the best I could do, and I'm really proud.
I'm a professional speaker, and I do talks across the country. And one of the things I lead with is the park bench, I call it, of regret. That you don't want to be in that stage and age at a place where you can't do those things that you can do now, because that's regret, and that's a killer. To me, that's my biggest fear. So the regret is always in the first and foremost on my mind. I'm going to do it. I don't want to think about it. And when you say live, lead with no regrets, live and lead with no regrets, there's three powerful words there. There's live over existence. There's lead over follow, which means lead your own life.
Yep.
Have no regrets, which is probably the most powerful piece on there.
Yeah.
Because if you want no regrets, you live
in that order, live and lead, right?
Yeah.
Because
if you want no regrets, you live and lead. That's right. Now, and now we're doing what we do when alphas do, is we're talking over each other. So tell me about it. Tell me where we find Shani Magosky. Where can I look you up and say, wow, there she is being hoisted upon. Well, I won't go there. Where do we find her?
My website is thebetterbossproject.com. The Better Boss Blueprint is on Amazon. And you can reach me at Shani at thebetterbossproject.com.
I think, thank you. I think that definition creates meaning, context. So how would you define a good leader?
A good leader is someone who brings out the best in others so that everybody's moving forward.
What do you think the purpose of leadership is?
To develop other people.
There you go.
Yeah, to develop other people towards a common goal.
What are some of the common mistakes? This is my last stock question for you. What do you think some of the common mistakes that you see leaders make? They could be, they're correctable ones. I mean, everything's correctable to a degree, but what are some of the common ones?
Yep. Well, I mean, we already talked about the poor communication. Mm-hmm. They're not having those difficult conversations, and that ends up creating a domino effect that I think most people don't even take the time to think through, right? If for example, if you're not addressing a poor performer and you're just letting that person go on in whatever fashion they are, like, not only is anything that person touches not excellent and not performing up to par, but the other people on the team are noticing, and it's creating water cooler talk and perhaps some resentment and poor customer service. And so when we don't address those conversations, the impact is pervasive and long lasting. So that's one of the biggest mistakes people make is shying away from the difficult conversations. I think another thing people make is being stuck in the past and or not changing as the world evolves.
She's not stuck in the past. There's a picture of her, though, when she is in the past, being hoisted up on hands and shoulders as a Miami hurricane, and she has a vision that she's following through to execution on how to create better bosses. She is Shani Magosky. She knows that the enemy of done is perfect, and she is aligned with her why. Man, she's out there living her purpose. Now we're going to dive into, Shani, my friend, the meat, what I call, of this conversation. How do you, and I mean cut and paste from some other book, how do you define success?
Being fulfilled. It's happiness on your own terms.
Oh. Ooh.
And there's a lot of shit underneath there.
There is. On your own terms, because so many of us are influenced by societal dictates, terms, and expectations. You bet.
And I am included in that, right? I have spent a lot of time coming to grips with I chose a different path than my colleagues who chose to stay at Goldman Sachs and who are either now running the firm or have left and are running other big firms or are in governments. And, you know, I chose a very different path that has, let's just say, isn't as lucrative. No one is crying for me, but you know, there's a lot more zeros on some of their paychecks than there are on mine. Yet, I have lived a life, back to the no regrets thing, that I am so happy with. I have lived in great places. I have pursued my hobbies. I've been able to maintain relationships with friends and family. I've been able to travel all over the world, exploring the things that really interest me. And I wouldn't have been able to do that if I had stuck in a place that takes it out of you 24/7, 365.
You know, isn't Goldman Sachs a place for the picking the U.S. The head of the Treasury? I mean, aren't there a lot of... Right?
Yes, among other things. There have also been 2 governors of the state of New Jersey from Goldman Sachs, including the present one.
The feeding and breeding ground for high-level talent. It is the high level. It's the creme de la creme.
It is. And I wouldn't trade my decade or so there for anything. It was a great place to get started as a junior person. And again, it's where I learned what good culture looks like, not just from an organization, but on the teams that I worked in, starting with investment banking. So incredibly valuable experience. And after you get to be a certain level of seniority, there's a fork in the road. You're either really devoting your life to it and signing up for a lifestyle where it's hard, once that train has left the station, it's hard to stop it, or you got to get off and pick another mode of transportation.
Critical juncture. Now, the other side of success is failure. So what do you think is your biggest failure? What did you take away from it?
Ooh, my biggest failure. You know, I mean, there's a couple of times in life that I've made some really bad decisions. And at the time, I suppose I looked at them as failure. Like, I got fired from a job. That at the time, that felt like a huge failure. And it ended up being one of the best learning experiences I've ever had. I've made some investments that were awful. Sent a lot of money to, you know, the birdcage lining factory through those investments. And again, I look back and I say, you know what? Better money, which is replaceable, than other things that I could have taken more for granted, like my health or my happiness or whatever the case may be. So, I mean, I know that sounds a little Pollyanna-ish, like, oh, turning failures into learning opportunities, but for God's sakes, like, if you don't do that, you dwell on them, and it makes you really unhappy.
Right. And if you don't learn from them, you condemn to repeat them. It's the same thing with that's history.
Absolutely.
So, we might have touched on this. I think we did obliquely, but I want to hit it directly. I want to talk about a moment. Well, I mean, it's on the oblique. It's, you know, it's tangential maybe on this. We might have hit it, but I want to talk about, I want you to tell me what your defining moment was. Where was that part when that fork in the road or whatever it was that gave you, I don't want to say epiphany, that is, but what gave you that and changed the trajectory of not only your career, but your life?
Right. There's a couple of them. I mean, I would say certainly getting hired at Goldman was one of those moments. Coming from the University of Miami, it's not like that was the first stop on their recruiting tour bus, right? In fact, my first job out of was at Chase Manhattan Bank in their management development program. Spent a year in their training program getting taught finance, economics, banking, etc., by professors from the MBA programs at NYU and Columbia. So essentially got paid to do an MBA. And after living in New York City for that first year and a half, I was like, wait a minute, I want to do investment banking, not commercial banking, and started interviewing at all the banks, knowing that Goldman was my first choice. And I interviewed really well, and Goldman is notorious for making people interview ad nauseum. And I would say I was ad nauseum plus, because some folks could not get over that I didn't have the quote unquote pedigree from an Ivy League or a liberal arts school in the Northeast. And someone finally gave me a chance and said, listen, guys, you obviously like this woman. We've brought her back to interview like 50 times. If it doesn't work out, we're hiring her for the investment banking analyst program, which is 2 years. If it doesn't work out, she's gone. Meanwhile, I was promoted to associate after 2 years instead of 3, went on to work in 3 divisions and had a very successful run there. So, that was definitely one pivotal moment. But I actually think that my very first pivotal moment was either the 2nd or 3rd grade. My family was living in Savannah, Georgia, and my dad had just started a job as the athletic director at the Jewish Center, the Jewish Community Center, like the YMCA, but for Jews. And they had a day school there that my sister and I got to go to tuition free because my dad was an employee. And this was the first time in my education that I was doing a bilingual program. We were doing half a day in English, half a day in Hebrew. And I didn't speak any Hebrew. We weren't religious at all. I didn't know any prayers. I didn't know any of that stuff. Well, later on in that first year at this school, I decided to participate in a blessings bee, which is like a spelling bee, but instead of them giving you a word you have to spell, they give you a context, and you have to give the blessing for washing your hands or eating bread or the second night of Hanukkah or whatever. And you had to recite it properly to advance to the next round. Well, long story short, I make it through all the rounds, and it's the final round of this thing. And there are a bunch of kids who dropped out along the way. Final round is me and the rabbi's son. Okay, and this is the Orthodox rabbi's son. This is a kid who probably knew Hebrew in his mother's womb, right? So he's been doing this stuff his whole life up until whatever we were, age 8. And would you know, I beat him.
Wow. You've been going against the odds all your life.
And so that really taught me, like, shit, like I can go for anything. Like, I can't let anybody tell me that it's impossible, or I can't, or I shouldn't, which, by the way, was also happening in the background. We had other members, other parents in the school saying, it doesn't look very good for your daughter to be going up against the rabbi's son. We think you should just have her bow out. And my parents were like, we're proud of our daughter. And whether she wins or loses, the fact that she's come this far, we're certainly not going to discourage her. So it was, I really think that was a seminal moment in my life.
It's a great one. And it's one of the things that make you unstoppable. See, that's all part of being unstoppable. You don't listen to the noise of the naysayers. You get out there and you do it. You put yourself forward. And when you get that type of success, especially early, you grow that confidence level. And confidence is the first thing people feel when you walk into a room. Your confidence has to be there, but it follows your confidence. They're going to buy you emotionally first. That's just how they do it. Now, you were waiting to answer this from up front. I know you were.
I was.
What's
the question?
What's next for you?
Oh, yes. Okay.
See?
Thank you. So the Better Boss Project is going to be transforming into the Leadership Project. And the Leadership
is it Leadership?
Leadership, right? Play on the word leadership.
Oh, I got it.
Leadership as opposed to leadership, which is what we see a lot out there.
You're going to get a lot of blowback on that, but go ahead.
Okay. And so I'm taking what we've been doing with the Better Boss Project and ratcheting it up a notch. First of all, has to be with leaders, right? Better Boss Project is for any boss, right? Boss yourself, boss of a company, boss of a startup, boss of a Fortune 500, boss of the PTA, right? Anybody can be a better boss interacting with other people. Leadership Project is specifically geared towards senior leaders and executives in the organization because that's where change has to happen from a cultural standpoint. And I think now the time is so ripe for organizations to finally take culture change seriously, right? Me Too and diversity and inclusion, like what happened at Starbucks, what happened at Nike, this shit cannot continue. And I think leaders are finally paying attention and willing to go beyond just the lip service of culture and say, okay, what do we really need to shift in our culture to make sure that those things aren't happening because they're not acceptable, and we know they're standing in the way of our ultimate success.
Well, your timing's perfect. Your timing's perfect. Absolutely perfect. If you haven't already, you need to purchase Shani's book. It's on Amazon. It's the Better Boss Blueprint. It's on Amazon, or go to thebetterbossproject.com. Here's the last one. You're going to nail this one because you've been nailing every one of them. If you could write one paragraph, all right, you're at the end of days, you're 200 years old because you take care of yourself, you've been doing all kinds of gymnastics and stuff, even after Miami. But if you were going to write one paragraph that you could help others to learn from, to grow from, to become more from, what would that paragraph look like?
Wow. Okay, that is a really good question. You know, I think it's be present, pay attention, not just to your career, pay attention to your relationships, pay attention to your life. We're just one person. And, you know, without getting into a spiritual, philosophical debate, like, I don't know what's next after this, right? And so make it count. And part of that is taking care of yourself, right? And I have this conversation with people all the time. They sacrifice their own mental, physical, spiritual health in service of what? Right? Making this quarter's sales goal, and everything else suffers, and then they get sick, and then they're further behind, or they're not. They get so wrapped up in what's in front of them in their radar screen, and like, you know, sort of like that urgent, important stuff, that they're not taking care to distance themselves from that and step back and look at what's really important, and how can I not be so consumed by the minutia and really back up and focus on bigger picture stuff. So I think it's hard to do any of that if you're not present, if you're not paying attention. And so many people just go through life on autopilot, and I see it more and more now with technology. People are like automatons, and they don't look up from their goddamn phones long enough to look at what's happening around them, or to look in the fucking mirror.
Oh, I got you going at the end, didn't I?
You did.
You know, lost in there, I don't want it to be lost. But you've got to know, and this is part of presence, this is part of being present, awareness. You've got to know the difference between what's important and what's urgent. Because you burn out and burn up under the urgent category of thinking everything's urgent, most of it's not important. The important thing is to take care of you first.
Yep.
You hit that well. You were fun.
It takes care of itself. I mean, you got to work at it. You still got to do, but you got to pay attention to the be.
You were edifying and you were engaging. So that's it for metaphors for me today. That's all I got for alliteration. But you were fantastic. One more time before we go, where can they find you? The audience wants to know.
TheBetterBossProject.com, and soon to be TheLeadershipProject.com as well. But that site's not up yet.
Can't wait to see what you get back on that leadership thing, but it's going to be great. For more guests like Shani, and she's a high bar, you've got to subscribe to the Wooditch Network. The Wooditch Network, it's the home of the Unstoppables and home to unstoppable guests like Shani. Thank you.